The sky above Earth was quiet that night, filled with stars twinkling like ancient watchers. But one star moved differently. It streaked across the dark canvas with a burning tail, crashing through the clouds and disappearing into the dense forest below. There was no sound, no thunderous boom, just the faint rustle of disturbed leaves as something small and strange fell through the trees. Deep within the woods, where humans rarely walked and where animals ruled in silence, the wreck of a tiny, alien spacecraft lay hidden beneath a blanket of broken branches and scattered sparks. Its metal hull, once smooth and silver, was now torn open like a crushed soda can. Smoke drifted from its sides in thin, ghost-like trails. Inside the wreck, nestled between collapsed walls and flickering panels, a soft whimper broke the silence. From behind a fractured seat emerged a figure no taller than a rabbit. Her skin shimmered in the dark, purple like a twilight sky. Too thin, antennae twitched gently atop her round head, and her large eyes glowed with a soft blue hue that pulsed like a heartbeat. Her name was Zuri, and she was only 6 years old by the standard years of her planet, Velura. She had never been this far from home. In fact, she had never even been off her home moon before. This trip was supposed to be a family mission, simple, safe, and short. But something had gone wrong, very wrong. The last thing she remembered before the crash was her mother yelling her name, her father slamming buttons on the control panel, alarms screaming in alien tongues, and then darkness. Now she was alone. The silence inside the ship felt like a scream held just beneath the surface. Zuri picked up a tiny device shaped like a leaf, the translator her parents gave her. She gripped it tightly in her 3-fingered hand, holding it like a lifeline. Climbing out of the wreck was hard. The metal edges were sharp, and her tiny body ached. Her legs trembled with each step. She finally crawled onto the soft moss outside and sat still for a long time, staring at the stars above. They didn't look the same from this planet. They seemed colder somehow, distant, unfamiliar. A sudden breeze rustled the trees around her. Shadows danced under the moonlight. Zuri's antennae twitched again. Her heart beat faster. Her people had always warned about Earth. Stories passed down from generation to generation spoke of giants, creatures called humans who ruled this planet. The tales were frightening. Humans were wild and unpredictable. Some stories claimed they captured small aliens and tossed them into cages. Others whispered of even worse things, how humans cooked tiny beings in boiling water or swallowed them whole without mercy. Of course, Zuri never believed all of it. But now, stranded and alone on a strange world, every tale clawed its way back into her mind. A rustling noise to her right made her freeze. Something, or someone, was coming. She spun around and ducked behind a fallen log covered in moss. Her little heart pounded so hard she feared the whole forest would hear it. Peeking out just slightly, she saw a towering figure walking carefully between the trees. It was tall, bipedal, wrapped in strange fabric from neck to feet, and carried a long stick in one hand and a bag on its back. The creature's face was pale, and brown hair stuck out from under a cloth hat. It was a human. Zuri's breath caught in her throat. Her blue eyes widened in terror. Every survival instinct told her to stay hidden, to wait until it passed. But the human stopped. Its gaze swept across the woods, and then locked right on her. Panic surged through her. Her small hand scrambled to press the translator, but it fumbled and buzzed in her grip. Her legs refused to move. The human took a slow step forward, then another. Its face didn't look angry or cruel, just curious. Zuri didn't wait. She squeezed the translator tightly and shouted through it in her tiny voice. "Do not eat." "Me, monster!" The words echoed unnaturally in the quiet forest, too loud for such a little body. But the machine had done its job. The human froze. His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then he raised his hands, showing he held nothing dangerous. "Eat you?" he said, confusion in his voice. "No, I'm not going to eat you." The translator picked up the words and played them back in her language, which made Zuri blink in surprise. The giant didn't act like the monsters from her stories. His face didn't twist with hunger or cruelty. His eyes looked more worried than anything else. Peering out from behind the log, Zuri stared at him in disbelief. Her voice trembled as she asked, "You not hungry for aliens?" The man knelt down, keeping his distance. "No, I promise," he said softly. "My name's Jake. I don't eat people. Not aliens, not anyone. Are you hurt?" Zuri didn't answer. She didn't know how. Every part of her training told her to run. But there was something about the way he spoke. Something calm, kind. And so, trembling from cold and fear, but driven by a flicker of hope, Zuri slowly stepped out from behind the log. Her tiny feet touched the mossy ground, and her glowing eyes never left the human's face. Jake smiled gently, then reached into his backpack. He pulled out a small wrapped object and carefully unpeeled it. The sweet smell drifted through the air, unfamiliar but pleasant. He held it out to her, half a chocolate bar. Zuri hesitated, sniffed the air, then tiptoed closer. She took a tiny bite. Her eyes lit up instantly. The taste exploded in her mouth. Warm, rich, sweet beyond anything her planet had ever created. Her fear cracked. Her lips curved into the smallest smile. "Oh, stars," she whispered, licking her fingers. "This is amazing." Jake chuckled. "Well, I guess that's a yes." And just like that, something unexpected began to bloom in the heart of the dark forest. Not fear, not war, but the tiniest seed of something greater. Trust. Jake watched in silence as the tiny alien girl slowly, cautiously, took a bite of the chocolate. Her eyes widened, and then, for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small curving of her lips. But to Jake, it felt like the entire forest had brightened. He didn't know much about aliens, except for the rumors and stories that he had read as a kid. But the little girl before him didn't look like anything he had imagined. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't a creature of danger. She was just a frightened, lost child, no different from the kids he had seen running around his small hometown. Jake slowly lowered the chocolate bar, watching as she ate with a strange mixture of hunger and awe. The soft glow in her eyes seemed to grow as she continued, and her antennae twitched in delight. She looked up at him, blinking curiously. "More?" she asked, her voice soft and small, but clear through the tiny translator device she clutched, tightly in her hand. He smiled. "I think that's enough for now. You wouldn't want to spoil your dinner," he teased gently, though he knew she probably hadn't had anything in days. "You must be hungry after what you've been through." The girl tilted her head, her antennae swiveling like little radar dishes. She was studying him, trying to understand this strange human before her. The translator device buzzed again, and her tiny voice echoed in the air. "You... human?" "Yeah," Jake replied simply. "I'm human. My name's Jake." The girl blinked, unsure what to make of his words. Her hands were shaking slightly as she lowered the chocolate wrapper. She had heard stories of humans before, terrifying stories. Humans were known for their ruthless ways, their endless hunger for power, and their willingness to destroy anything they didn't understand. They were monsters in every sense of the word. And yet, this human, Jake, was offering her food, not a cage, not a threat. He had given her chocolate, the sweetest thing she had ever tasted, and he hadn't tried to hurt her, not even once. "I'm Zuri," she whispered after a long pause. "Zuri of Valura." Her words were quiet, as if she feared the forest might carry them off into the winds, as if saying her name might somehow make her more vulnerable. Jake didn't react as she expected. He didn't back away. He didn't show fear. Instead, he just nodded. "It's nice to meet you, Zuri." His voice was calm and warm, not at all what she had been prepared for. For a few moments, there was an uncomfortable silence. Zuri looked around nervously, her antennae twitching. She didn't know where to go, what to do, or what would happen next. Her ship had crashed, and her family had vanished. She was alone on a strange planet filled with strange creatures who might want to eat her, trap her, or worse. The ground beneath her felt soft, too soft for a creature like her. The trees towered above her like giants, casting shadows that seemed to stretch forever. The night air was filled with sounds she couldn't quite place, and the darkness seemed alive, breathing with an energy she couldn't understand. Jake was still watching her, waiting patiently for her to say something more, but all she could do was sit there, lost in her thoughts. The human had been kind. But did that mean all humans were kind? No, Zuri knew better than that. She had heard the stories, the terrifying stories. Even one kind human didn't mean the entire species could be trusted. She had to stay cautious. Finally, Jake broke the silence again. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small bottle of water. "You probably need this," he said, offering it to her with a friendly smile. "I know it's not much, but it's something." Zuri eyed the bottle, her fear returning. Water wasn't dangerous, but she wasn't sure how this human would react if she accepted it. Would he trap her somehow? Would he take her to a lab and experiment on her? She couldn't trust him, not fully. She couldn't let her guard down, just because he gave her chocolate and water. But then she thought about how tired she was, how thirsty, how hungry. She was alone in a strange world, and there was no way she could survive without help. Maybe, just maybe, this human was different. Tentatively, she took the bottle, unscrewing the cap and sipping the water slowly. It was cool and refreshing, exactly what she needed. She glanced at Jake again, this time a little less fearful, a little more curious. She had so many questions, but she wasn't sure how to ask them. She didn't even know where to begin. "Where do you come from, Zuri?" Jake asked, his voice gentle. "You said Velura. That's not an Earth name. Are you from another planet?" Zuri nodded slowly, her antennae trembling as she spoke. "Yes, I am from Velura. We are peaceful. My people are peaceful. But now—" Her voice broke off, and she looked down at the ground, unable to continue. Her family had been so close to reaching their destination. They had been on a peaceful mission to learn, to explore, to understand other worlds. But now, everything had changed. She was the only one left, stranded on a strange, unfamiliar planet. She wasn't even sure if anyone from her people was still alive. Jake watched her closely, his expression softening. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, not knowing what else to say. He wasn't sure how to comfort her. She was an alien, something he had only read about in stories and seen in movies, but in that moment, she was just a scared little girl in need of help. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to be so far from home, with no one to turn to. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to abandon her. "Hey," Jake said, his voice warm and reassuring. "You're not alone, not as long as I'm here. I'll help you. I don't know what happened to your family, but I'll do whatever I can to help you figure it out. We'll get through this together." Zuri looked up at him, her blue eyes wide, and for the first time, she truly believed that he meant it. She had heard the stories, the terrifying tales of humans, but here was one human offering something that no alien could have expected, a genuine kindness. It didn't make sense. It wasn't what she had been told to expect, but it was real. And for now, it was enough. The morning came slowly, its light breaking through the dense trees like the first rays of hope in a world that had seemed dark the night before. Zuri woke to the sound of birds calling in the distance, and the soft rustle of the forest around her. Her tiny body still ached from the crash, and the shock of the night before lingered in her mind. But now, as she opened her eyes to the light of the new day, something inside her had shifted. It wasn't the fear that had gripped her so tightly before. Now there was a strange, quiet trust. She had never imagined she would wake up on an alien world and find herself in the company of a human who hadn't tried to hurt her, a human who had offered her food and water, who had spoken to her kindly. It didn't make sense, but it was real. Jake had spent the night beside her, keeping a careful watch on the small clearing where they had camped. He had started a fire, not for warmth. It wasn't cold, not in the way Zuri was used to, but for the comfort it brought. The crackling flames seemed to offer reassurance that, despite the strangeness of the situation, there was safety here. Not the kind of safety she had known on her home moon, but something different. Something she hadn't expected to find on Earth. As the sunlight filtered through the branches above them, Jake stood and stretched, his tired muscles aching. His night had been long, filled with thoughts of how he could help Zuri. He didn't know how to get her back home, didn't know if that was even possible. The crash had been so sudden, so violent. But he had to try. Zuri had no one else, and he had promised her he would help. He couldn't break that promise. "Good morning," Jake said softly, his voice still a little groggy from sleep. He didn't want to startle her. He had learned that Zuri was skittish, that even the smallest movement could make her retreat into herself. But when she turned to face him, there was something different in her eyes, a quiet curiosity mixed with the remnants of her fear. "Morning," Zuri replied, her voice still soft, though a little less shaky than the night before. She had already begun to adjust to the strange surroundings, though the ache of loss remained in her heart. She missed her family. The silence of being alone felt suffocating at times. Yet she found herself standing and walking over to where Jake had set up the small camp, something she had never thought possible. The idea of trusting a human seemed absurd, yet here she was, doing just that. Jake smiled gently, sensing her hesitation, but also the slight shift in her demeanor. "I've been thinking about what we should do next," he said. "I'm going to try to get help. I don't know if there's anyone out there who can help you get back to your planet, but we'll figure it out together." Zuri didn't speak for a long moment. The thought of being sent back home was comforting, but it also felt impossible. She had no idea how to return to Velura, how to find her family, or even if they were still alive. The crash had torn everything apart. But Jake's words, his promise to help her, lingered in her mind. For the first time, she considered the possibility that she wasn't completely alone. What if no one can help me? Zuri's voice trembled slightly, betraying the uncertainty she felt deep inside. What if I'm stuck here, forever? Jake crouched down beside her, his face soft with understanding. "I won't let that happen," he said firmly. "We'll figure it out, no matter what it takes." Zuri looked at him for a long time, her antennae twitching in thought. There was something in his voice, something real. She didn't know if he could truly help, but for the first time since the crash, she felt the smallest sliver of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her believe she could survive this. The journey ahead was uncertain. Jake knew that, but he didn't let it show. The forest around them seemed endless, stretching out in all directions. There were no clear paths, no signs of civilization. He didn't even know which way to go. The best he could do was follow the distant roads he had seen on the map he'd studied back home. He had no way of knowing if any of them would lead to help, but he had to try. With Zuri beside him, he packed up what little gear they had, a small tent, some rations, and the last of the water. There wasn't much, but it was enough to get them through the day. They walked in silence for a while, the weight of the unknown hanging over them. Zuri's small steps were quick, and Jake had to slow his pace to match hers. She didn't speak much, but Jake could tell she was observing everything around her with the careful eyes of someone who had learned to survive in a harsh world. She didn't seem afraid anymore, though there was a quiet tension in her movements. She was listening, watching, feeling out every situation. As they moved deeper into the forest, Jake began to talk to her about his life. He didn't know why, but it felt right. Maybe it was because there was no one else to talk to. Maybe it was because he wanted her to know that he wasn't some stranger who meant her harm. He told her about his family, about his hometown, about the things that mattered to him. Zuri listened, her big eyes fixed on him as she absorbed every word. She wasn't sure what to make of it. Her people didn't have families the way humans did. They didn't share stories like this. But there was something comforting about Jake's words, even though they were so different from what she had known. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. The path they walked was rough, but they kept moving forward, putting distance between them and the wreckage. Zuri's legs were growing tired, but she didn't complain. She was determined to keep going, even if the road ahead seemed endless. Jake didn't pressure her, giving her space to move at her own pace. Then, in the distance, they heard something. Voices. Low, indistinct, but there. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? Were they close to help? Could they finally find someone who could help Zuri get back home? His mind raced with possibilities, but there was no time to waste. He grabbed Zuri's hand gently, pulling her behind a large tree, both of them hiding in the shadows. The voices grew louder, and Jake's fingers tightened around the small alien's hand. They weren't alone anymore. The moment was thick with tension, and everything seemed to pause. The rustling of leaves above them, the distant calls of unseen creatures, and the soft whisper of wind through the trees all faded into silence. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched low beside Zuri, their breaths shallow, both of them hidden behind the towering tree trunk. The voices they had heard grew louder, unmistakably human, but they were not the comforting sounds Jake had hoped for. There was something off about them, something unsettling. He could feel Zuri tense beside him. She had never been this close to humans before, and now, after everything that had happened, she felt the unfamiliar weight of distrust creeping back into her chest. Her small hand gripped his tighter, her soft breathing a clear sign of her nervousness. Jake glanced down at her, his face softening with empathy, but he couldn't speak. Not yet. If they were discovered, they would have to face whatever this group was. Whoever they were. The voices grew closer, but they did not come into view. It was as if they knew someone was there, hidden, just out of sight. The air around them seemed to hum with a strange energy, a foreboding presence that made Jake's skin prickle. He could hear the crunch of footsteps in the underbrush, the shuffling sound of someone moving through the forest. It wasn't the soft, careful movements of someone trying to be quiet. These footsteps were heavy, deliberate, and full of purpose. Jake's mind raced. He had no idea who these people were, or if they were friendly. He only knew that Zuri was in danger if they discovered her. With a soft sigh, he gently tugged at her arm, pulling her even closer to the tree trunk. He couldn't allow them to get close, not yet, not until he knew more. From the shadows of the trees, Jake dared a glimpse. His eyes scanned the clearing ahead, searching for any sign of the approaching group. His muscles tightened, ready to spring into action if necessary. Then he saw them. 3 figures, 2 men and a woman. They weren't wearing military uniforms, or any other type of gear Jake would associate with official groups. They looked more like survivors, people who had been living off the land for a while. Their clothing was worn, torn at the edges, and their faces were lined with exhaustion, as though they had seen too much. The woman had her hand raised, holding something. Jake couldn't tell what it was from this distance, but it was clear. She was leading the group, guiding them through the thick trees. She stopped abruptly, signaling for the others to stay still. Her sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, as if she could sense something, a disturbance in the natural order. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Was she looking for them? Could she sense them hiding? He froze, holding his breath, willing his body to remain still, hoping they wouldn't be seen. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. The woman slowly lowered her hand, signaling for the group to continue. The men followed her, their eyes scanning the ground, their movements cautious. It was as if they were tracking something, someone, possibly even them. Jake's mind reeled. What did they want? Were they part of some larger group? Were they dangerous? Should we move? Zuri whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet forest. Her wide eyes searched the group, trying to make sense of what was happening. Jake's grip on her hand tightened as he tried to decide. Moving would risk being caught, but staying still might make them seem like prey, waiting to be discovered. The longer they remained hidden, the more the woman's suspicion grew, and Jake could feel it in his bones. She would not pass by without a search. In a split second, Jake made a decision. He had to act before they were found. Stay close, he whispered, his voice calm but urgent. He moved quickly, pulling Zuri with him as he ducked behind another thick cluster of trees. They crept silently through the underbrush, barely making a sound, desperate to put distance between themselves and the three strangers. Just as they were about to clear the edge of the trees and head toward a patch of open ground, a voice stopped them. Wait. It was the woman's voice. She spoke sharply, with an authority that sent a chill down Jake's spine. Before he could react, she called again, louder this time. I know you're out there. You're not alone. Jake froze. Zuri's small body trembled beside him. She had been trying so hard to remain quiet, to remain hidden. But now, the woman's voice had torn through that fragile illusion. The hunt had begun. We don't want trouble, Jake called back, his voice calm but loud enough to carry. He didn't want to sound afraid, but it was hard to mask the edge in his tone. We're just passing through. We mean no harm. There was a brief silence, the sound of shifting branches and quiet footsteps signaling the woman's decision. Then she spoke again, her voice tinged with curiosity. We know what you're hiding. Come out, and let's talk. We're not here to fight. Reluctantly, Jake emerged from the shadow of the trees, still holding Zuri's hand tightly. His heart was pounding, and every instinct screamed at him to retreat. But Zuri needed help, and right now, these people might be their only hope. Zuri stepped forward cautiously, her eyes wide as she took in the group. The woman had an air of authority about her, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and her posture suggesting someone who had been through a great deal. The men stood behind her, both of them watching them closely, their expressions unreadable. The woman didn't speak at first. Instead, she studied Zuri, her eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed the tiny alien. Then, after a long moment, she finally spoke. She's not from around here, is she? Jake swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. No, she's not from Earth. The woman's eyes flicked to Jake, studying him now, trying to gauge whether he was lying or telling the truth. I knew it, she muttered under her breath. No one's been able to get past the shield without making a crash landing like this one. Jake didn't understand, but there was no time to ask. The woman's eyes softened, and for the first time since they had met, she smiled. A small, almost imperceptible thing. We can help, she said, but you're going to need to trust us. Jake glanced at Zuri, whose nervousness was still palpable. He could see the hesitation in her eyes. He had never felt more uncertain, but somehow the woman's words felt real. Maybe, just maybe, they had found someone who could help them. Without another word, the woman turned on her heel and gestured for the group to follow. Come on, we've got shelter nearby. You'll need it if you want to survive out here. Jake and Zuri exchanged a look, unsure of what the future held. But in this strange, dangerous world, they didn't have many options left. They had no choice but to follow and hope that the woman's words weren't a trap. As they walked into the unknown, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was only the beginning.